Welcome to my online lecture. This lecture is presented by Michelle Zeig, and this lecture will be about the model of interpersonal communication. This particular online lecture has 3 learning outcomes, and at the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. List the 5 main components of the interpersonal communication model, 2. List the 3 secondary components of the interpersonal communication model, and 3. Explain the differences between internal and external noise. Before we jump into looking at the model, I think it's important to come up with a definition or provide a definition of what interpersonal communication is. It makes sense if we're going to look at a model of interpersonal communication and look at the components that we should start with kind of a shared understanding of what interpersonal communication is. So if we start on a large scale and we look at the idea of or the concept of communication, we know that that is the process of acting on information. So if we start on that larger scale and we move down one level, we get to human communication. Human communication is the process of making sense out of the world around us and attempting to share that sense with others. If we go one more level, we arrive at interpersonal communication, which is what the model that we're going to look at is all about. And interpersonal communication is the process of 2 individuals interacting and mutually influencing each other simultaneously, usually for the purpose of managing relationships. I've attached to the bottom of this slide a hot link that goes out to a YouTube video that shows 2, probably 18, 19-month-old twins talking, and that's what I want you to do. I'd like you to click on this link, go out and watch the twins talking, and see if it matches that definition of interpersonal communication above. Are these 2 twins interacting and mutually influencing each other simultaneously, managing a relationship? What's funny about this video is that you quickly figure out that these twins are not using language that you and I would recognize. They're babbling back and forth, but yet their babbling seems to be communicating messages back and forth, and they seem to be influencing each other. So I encourage you to take a quick look at that. It's a very short video, but I encourage you to take a look at that. After we have a definition of what interpersonal communication is, I think it's important then to look at the model. We're going to start with the main components of interpersonal communication, and this model shows 5 main components: episode, source, message, channel, and receiver. The episode is just the communication act, the conversation, the actual episode of the communication happening. The source is the person who is sending the message. They are encoding, meaning they are taking those thoughts and ideas in their heads and finding a way, the right words or the gestures or whatever to communicate. The message is actually what they are sending. It's the content. They choose a channel to send their message, and the channel can be any of the 5 senses. It can be we choose to send a message that will be received through our eyes, through touch, through our ears, if it's a verbal message, through smell. All of those are channels that we can choose to send our message through. Obviously then for interpersonal communication there needs to be a receiver. The receiver then receives the message and decodes it or makes sense for themselves. So the main components are the episode itself, the source, the message, the channel, and the receiver. If we look a little deeper into the model of interpersonal communication, we see that there are some secondary components that probably aren't quite as obvious. The first one is noise, and whenever we are engaged in communication, there is internal and external noise present. Internal noise is anything that is going on within your body. So it could be thoughts, it could be if you're particularly hungry, if you're tired, any of those things that are going on inside of your head, if you're distracted. Those are all considered internal noise. External noise, on the other hand, is anything that's happening in the environment. It could be that you're trying to have a conversation and you're in a loud bar, or you're having a conversation and the TV is on and you're distracted by the TV. Another secondary component is feedback. Feedback is what we get when we respond back to the other person. And lastly is context. Context is where the communication is happening. So just to kind of to remind you again of what our learning outcomes are, they're to list the 5 main components of the interpersonal comm model, list the 3 secondary components of the interpersonal communication model, and third, explain the differences between internal and external noise.